She stood there like a ghost in the fading afternoon light, her small bare feet planted on the hot pavement outside Golden Light's boutique in the heart of Accra's Ozu district. 14-year-old Amara pressed her palms and forehead against the glass window, her breath fogging the surface as she stared at a pair of black leather school shoes displayed on a velvet cushion under a golden spotlight. They were not extravagant. No diamonds, no foreign brand names, just simple, sturdy shoes with laces that could tie a girl's future together. Her eyes, dark and glistening with unshed tears, traced every stitch, every curve of the leather, as if memorizing a prayer. In her right hand, she clutched a crumpled 20-cedi note, damp from her sweaty palm, and folded so many times it had become soft as cloth. 2 months of waking before dawn to sell oranges at Makola Market. 2 months of skipping meals and ignoring her growling stomach. 2 months of dodging her aunt's insults and sleeping on a thin mat that smelled of mildew. All for this moment. But when she had asked the shopkeeper that morning, the woman had looked at her torn dress and dusty skin and said the shoes cost 120 cedis. Amara's heart had shattered quietly, the way glass breaks underwater. The security guard, a tall man with a scar across his cheek and no patience for poor children, tapped his baton against the window and shouted for her to move along, that she was blocking paying customers. But there were no customers. There was only Amara and her impossible dream, separated by a wall of glass that might as well have been made of mountains. She stepped back slowly, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall in public, and turned away from the boutique. Across the street, sitting on an overturned paint bucket, with a wooden box of brushes and polish at his feet, a 12-year-old shoeshine boy named Kwame had been watching everything. He saw the way her shoulders shook. He saw the way she looked back one last time before disappearing into the crowd. And in that moment, Kwame understood what the adults walking past her did not. That some dreams, when deferred, don't just fade, they suffocate the dreamer from the inside out. 6 months earlier, Amara had been a student at Kainshi Community School, a modest institution with peeling yellow paint and overcrowded classrooms, where the teachers still believed education could break the chains of poverty. She had been bright, curious, always raising her hand, even when she wasn't sure of the answer. Always staying after class to help the younger children with their letters. Her teacher, Mr. Mensah, had told her once that she had the kind of mind that could go anywhere, university, maybe even overseas, if only she kept working hard. Amara had held on to those words like a talisman, repeating them to herself whenever her aunt called her stupid or useless. But then the rainy season came, and with it, the slow disintegration of her only pair of shoes. They had belonged to her mother once, old even then, and Amara had been wearing them for 3 years, stuffing the toes with newspaper as her feet grew. The sole separated from the upper, flapping open like a hungry mouth with each step. She tried to glue them back together with tree sap. She tried tying them with string. But one morning, as she walked to school through the muddy roads, the shoes simply gave up, falling apart completely, leaving her standing in the middle of the path, with pieces of rubber and canvas in her hands. She had gone to school barefoot that day, her feet cut and caked with red mud, and the headmaster had sent her home. "No shoes, no school," he had said, not unkindly but firmly, as if he were simply reciting a law of nature. "It's policy, Amara. The government requires it. Come back when you have proper footwear." She had walked home in silence, the policy echoing in her head like a funeral drum. When she told Auntie Isi what had happened, expecting perhaps some sympathy or a promise to help, her aunt had laughed, a bitter, sharp sound like breaking bottles, and said, You think money grows on trees? You think I'm running a charity here? If you want shoes so badly, go find them yourself." And so Amara had stopped going to school. She became a ghost in her own life, hawking oranges in the market, while her former classmates learned mathematics and geography, while Mr. Mensah surely wondered why the bright girl in the third row had vanished without explanation. Dreams, she learned, could be killed by something as small as the absence of shoes. Auntie Isie's compound sat on the outskirts of Accra, where the city's bright lights dimmed into shadows and the promises of prosperity turned to dust. It was a small, cramped structure, with walls the color of old bones and a roof that leaked during every rainstorm, forcing Amara to position buckets around the single room she shared with 3 cousins who treated her like a servant. AC was her father's younger sister, a woman who had been beautiful once, people said, before bitterness carved deep lines around her mouth, and alcohol swelled her face into a permanent scowl. She had taken Amara in after the accident, the car crash that killed both of Amara's parents on the road to Kumasi 3 years ago. But she had done so with the enthusiasm of someone accepting a prison sentence. "Your father thought he was too good for this family," Essie would say, whenever she was drunk, which was often. "Thought he could move to the city and forget where he came from." And what did it get him? A grave and a useless daughter. Amara had learned not to respond to these attacks, to make herself small and silent, to exist like furniture that could be ignored until needed. She woke before dawn to fetch water from the communal pump. She swept the compound. She washed clothes by hand until her knuckles cracked and bled. She cooked meals she was allowed to eat only after everyone else had finished. And through it all, she held on to the memory of her parents, her father's gentle laugh, her mother's soft hands braiding her hair, the way they had called her their little light, and promised her that education would open every door in the world. But Auntie Isie had locked those doors one by one. First, by refusing to buy her school supplies. Then, by forgetting to pay her school fees. And finally, by letting her shoes fall apart without replacement, knowing exactly what it would mean. On this particular evening, as Amara returned home from another fruitless day at the market, where she had earned barely enough to buy rice for dinner, she found her aunt sitting in the plastic chair outside the house, a bottle of akpateshi clutched in one hand, and her phone pressed to her ear with the other. AC was laughing, loud and careless, speaking to someone in a voice thick with alcohol and shamelessness. Amara moved quietly toward the house, hoping to slip past unnoticed, but her aunt's words stopped her cold. "Oh, that education grant," Ezzy was saying, chuckling into the phone. "Yes, they sent it months ago. 2,000 cedis in the girl's name. But please, what does she need it for? She's not even in school anymore. So I used it to fix my hair, bought this beautiful Brazilian wig, and the rest went to, well, you know, living expenses." The person on the other end must have said something amusing, because AC threw her head back and cackled. "The child doesn't know anything about it. She's too foolish to ask questions. Besides, who's she going to report me to? She has no one but me." Amara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. An education grant, 2,000 cedis, in her name. Money that was supposed to be for her schooling, her books, her future, stolen and spent on vanity and bottles. She stood frozen in the growing darkness, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. All this time, while she had been hawking oranges and saving every coin, while she had been told there was no money for shoes or school fees, while she had been made to feel like a burden and a beggar, there had been money, her money, money meant to give her back her education. And Auntie Isie had taken it as casually as someone plucking fruit from a tree. The betrayal burned through Amara like acid, dissolving the last fragile threads of hope she had been clinging to. She wanted to scream. She wanted to rush forward and confront her aunt, to demand answers and justice. But she knew how that story would end. Essie would deny it, or worse, she would admit it and laugh, and then Amara would be punished for eavesdropping, for disrespect, for daring to question the woman who had generously given her a roof over her head. So instead, Amara did what she had learned to do best. She swallowed her pain, walked past her aunt with her eyes on the ground, and went inside to prepare dinner with shaking hands. That night, lying on her thin mat, while her cousins snored around her, Amara made a decision. She would not ask her aunt for anything ever again. She would save every CD herself, no matter how long it took, no matter how impossible it seemed. She would earn those shoes with her own hands, and when she finally walked back into that school, it would be on her own terms, owing nothing to the woman who had stolen her future. Some dignity, she thought, can only be preserved through silence and stubbornness. The weeks that followed were a testament to Amara's quiet determination. She woke even earlier, while the city was still wrapped in darkness, and the first prayers were just beginning to echo from distant mosques. She doubled her work, taking on jobs other children refused, scrubbing cooking pots for the food vendors, carrying heavy loads for market women, cleaning the gutters that overflowed with garbage after every rain. Her body ached constantly. Her hands developed calluses on top of calluses. But slowly, painfully, her small savings began to grow. She hid the money in a hole she had dug beneath a loose stone behind the compound, wrapped in plastic to keep it dry, counting and recounting it every night like a miser counting treasure. 50 CDs, 60, 75. Yeah, each coin was a small victory, a tiny step closer to the shoes that had become in her mind not just footwear, but a symbol of everything she had lost and everything she still dared to hope for. Kwame, the shoe-shine boy, had become her unlikely friend during this time. They never spoke much. Both of them understood that poverty creates its own language of silence, but he would save scraps of bread for her, and she would share oranges when she had extra. And sometimes they would just sit together in companionable quiet, two children who had learned too early that the world was not designed for their comfort. He told her once about his own dream, to save enough money to buy a sewing machine so his mother could start a tailoring business and stop working as a cleaner in the wealthy neighborhoods where people treated her like she was invisible. Dreams are expensive, Kwame had said, with the philosophical sadness of someone much older. But I think maybe that's what makes them worth having. Amara had nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Then came the evening of the rainstorm, a massive, violent downpour that arrived without warnings as the sun was setting over Makola Market. The sky opened up like a broken dam, releasing sheets of water that turned the market into a river within minutes. Vendors screamed and scrambled to save their goods, pulling tarps over electronics and dragging bags of rice to higher ground. Customers ran for shelter, and within seconds, the bustling market transformed into chaos. Amara had been selling oranges near the main road when the storm hit, and she watched in horror as her carefully arranged fruit began to wash away, rolling into gutters and floating toward the drainage canals. These oranges represented 3 days of profits, and losing them meant 3 more days until she could afford her shoes. Without thinking, she dropped to her knees in the flooding street and began frantically gathering the fruit, shoving them back into her basket, even as the rain beat down on her head and shoulders, like fists, even as the water rose around her ankles and then her knees. Her dress was soaked through, clinging to her thin frame. Her hair, usually plaited neatly, came loose and hung in wet ropes around her face. She was sobbing and working simultaneously, her hands moving in desperate speed, when suddenly an umbrella appeared above her, blocking the rain. Amara looked up, water streaming down her face, and saw a man standing over her. He was tall and dignified, dressed in a spotless white caftan that seemed to glow in the gray stormlight. His shoes, polished to a mirror, shined despite the flooding street. His face was kind, with lines around his eyes that suggested someone who had smiled often and genuinely throughout his life. Without a word, he crouched down beside her, holding the umbrella steady with one hand, and with the other began helping her collect the oranges. His expensive clothes were getting dirty, his shoes were getting ruined, but he worked as if it were the most natural thing in the world, plucking fruit from the rushing water and placing them gently in her basket. When they had saved most of the oranges, the man stood and helped Amara to her feet. She was trembling from cold and shock and the sheer strangeness of a well-dressed stranger stopping to help a poor market girl. He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. She took it with shaking hands and wiped her face, though she was still so wet that it barely made a difference. "What is your name?" the man asked, his voice deep and gentle, the kind of voice that made you want to trust it. "Amara," she whispered, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't name. "Amara," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "That's a beautiful name. It means grace, doesn't it?" She nodded, surprised that he knew. Her father had told her the same thing once, explaining that he and her mother had chosen her name carefully, believing that a name could shape a destiny. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely audible over the drumming rain. "For helping me." He smiled, a warm, sad smile that seemed to carry its own stories, and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crisp 100 Sedai note and pressed it into her palm, folding her fingers over it before she could protest. "For the oranges you lost," he said, "and for being brave enough to fight for what's yours." Before Amara could respond, before she could even process what had just happened, the man turned and walked toward a black SUV, parked nearby, where a driver was waiting with the door already open. She stood frozen, staring at the money in her hand, her mind spinning. 100 Sedais, more than she had saved in 2 months of backbreaking work. More than enough to finally buy her shoes. She suddenly realized she needed to return it. It was too much. She couldn't possibly accept it. And she ran after the vehicle, splashing through the flooded street, calling out, "Sir! Sir, wait!" But the SUV was already pulling away, its tail lights disappearing into the curtain of rain. She stood there in the middle of the road, soaked and confused, and holding more money than she had ever possessed in her life. Kwame appeared beside her, equally drenched, his eyes wide with recognition. "Do you know who that was?" he asked in an awed whisper. "That was Chief Osei Bawama, the billionaire, the one who owns all the hotels and the shopping centers. They say he's one of the richest men in Ghana." But Amara barely heard him. She was staring at the money in her hand, feeling something shift in her chest. Not gratitude exactly, but something deeper and more confusing. This stranger had seen her, in a city of millions, in the chaos of a rainstorm, with people running past caring only for themselves. This man had stopped and seen her as a human being worth helping. That recognition felt more valuable than the money itself. With the 100 cedis from the stranger and her own savings, Amara finally had enough to buy the shoes. She could barely sleep that night, her heart racing with anticipation and relief. She imagined walking into the boutique the next day, imagined the feel of new leather on her feet, imagined returning to school with her head high and her future restored. She fantasized about seeing Mr. Mensa again, about the surprise and pride on his face when she walked back into his classroom. She even allowed herself to imagine going further, finishing school, maybe getting a scholarship to secondary school, perhaps even university, like Mr. Mensa had once suggested. The shoes had become a doorway in her mind, and through that doorway she could see a version of herself she had almost stopped believing in. Amara the student, Amara the achiever, Amara who was more than just an orphan and a burden. The next morning she bathed carefully, scrubbing the market smell from her skin, and put on her least worn dress. She braided her hair as neatly as she could, without a mirror. She counted her money 3 times to be certain, adding the 100 CD noted to her own savings, 123 CDs in total, 3 more than she needed. She wrapped the money in a piece of cloth and held it close to her chest as she walked the familiar route to Golden Light's boutique, her bare feet following the path they had traced so many times before. The morning sun was bright and hot, the storm from the night before already seeming like a dream. As she approached the boutique, she saw Kwame at his usual spot, and he gave her an encouraging thumbs up that made her smile. Her heart was hammering as she reached for the door handle of the shop, ready to finally step from the outside, looking into the inside, looking out. But then she heard a voice she knew too well, harsh and loud and slurred with morning alcohol, and her blood turned to ice. Auntie Yacy was inside the boutique, yelling at the shopkeeper, her face flushed with rage and intoxication, her finger jabbing the air like a weapon. "I'm telling you, that girl is a thief," she was shouting. "She stole money from my purse last night, 100 CDs, and now she's coming here to spend it on shoes like some princess." The shopkeeper, the same woman who had quoted prices to Amara days before, looked confused and uncomfortable, trying to calm the situation. "Madam, please, I don't know anything about—" But Yacy wasn't listening. Her eyes caught sight of Amara standing in the doorway, and something vicious and triumphant flashed across her face. There she is, the little thief. She lunged forward and grabbed Amara's wrist with painful force, her fingers digging into the girl's thin arm. "Give me that money. Give it to me right now." Amara tried to pull away, tried to explain that the money was hers, that she had saved it and earned it and received it honestly. But her voice came out small and broken, no match for her aunt's alcohol-fueled fury. Other shoppers had stopped to watch, creating an audience for Amara's humiliation. "I didn't steal anything," Amara managed to say, tears already streaming down her face. "The money is mine. I saved it. A man gave me—" "A man?" Essie's face twisted into something ugly. "Oh, so now you're taking money from men. Even worse, you shameless girl." She snatched the cloth bundle from Amara's hands, tearing it open and snatching the bills. Amara watched helplessly as every CD she had fought for disappeared into her aunt's purse. "This is mine," Essie declared loudly to the watching crowd. "She stole it from me and I'm taking it back. And when I get her home, she's going to learn what happens to thieves in this family." The shopkeeper looked at Amara with something that might have been pity, but not enough conviction to intervene. No one intervened. No one wanted to get involved in family business. And Auntie Yacy, satisfied with her performance and her recovered money, turned and walked out of the boutique without another word, leaving Amara standing there in the shocked silence, her hands empty, her dreams once again scattered at her feet like broken glass. Amara stumbled out of the boutique in a daze, her vision blurred by tears, her chest heaving with sobs she could no longer control. She made it to the corner before her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the curb outside a closed pharmacy, burying her face in her hands and crying with the kind of complete devastation that comes when the last thread of hope finally snaps. Kwame found her there minutes later and sat beside her without speaking, because what words could possibly help? All the work, all the sacrifice, all the careful saving and planning and hoping, stolen in an instant by the one person who was supposed to protect her. It wasn't just about the shoes anymore. It was about the realization that she would never escape, that Auntie Essie would always find ways to keep her trapped and small and powerless, that the system was designed to let people like her aunt win, and people like Amara lose. "I can't go back there," Amara finally said, her voice hollow. "I can't go back to that house, Kwame. I can't." "Then don't," Kwame said simply. "Not tonight anyway. Come with me." He took her to the old community church at the edge of the market district, a humble wooden structure painted white, with blue trim, surrounded by red dust and mango trees heavy with fruit. The pastor, an elderly man named Pastor Kofi, with white hair and hands, gnarled from decades of manual labor, was sweeping the front steps when they arrived. He took one look at Amara's face and ushered them inside without questions, bringing water and a cloth for her to wash her face, speaking in a low, soothing voice about God's grace and endurance. "I knew your parents," Pastor Kofi said suddenly, and Amara's head snapped up. "Your father, Samuel, and your mother, Abina. They used to attend this church before they moved closer to the city. Good people. Your father especially. He had a heart that couldn't see suffering without trying to fix it." He settled into a wooden chair, his eyes distant with memory. "Let me tell you a story about your father, child. Something you might not know. This was more than 30 years ago," Pastor Kofi began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone accustomed to storytelling. "Your father was just a young man then, maybe 17 or 18, working as a mechanic's apprentice to save money for school. He didn't have much. None of us did in those days. But Samuel had this one pair of good shoes, leather shoes, polished until they shined, that he wore to church every Sunday and kept like treasure the rest of the week. Those shoes were important to him. You understand? They represented dignity, aspiration, the possibility of rising above circumstances." Pastor Kofi paused, taking a sip of water before continuing. "One Sunday, a boy came to church. A stranger from a village several miles away, maybe 13 or 14 years old, walking barefoot on roads that would tear your feet to ribbons. Someone had told him about a school in our town that was accepting students on scholarship, but the headmaster was strict. He wouldn't even allow an interview without proper dress, including shoes. The boy had walked all that way, hoping someone at the church might help him find used shoes, anything that would let him at least try for the opportunity. I still remember how he sat in the back pew after service, his feet bleeding, his face trying so hard to look brave, while his eyes betrayed his desperation." The pastor smiled at the memory. "Your father saw him. Didn't ask anyone for permission. Didn't make a show of it. He simply went to the boy, sat down beside him, and took off his shoes, his only good shoes, and he gave them to that stranger. Just like that. The boy tried to refuse, of course, said he couldn't possibly accept such a gift. But Samuel insisted. He said, and I'll never forget these words, 'Shoes are just leather and thread, but an education is the bridge between who you are and who you could become. Take the bridge. I'll find another way.'" Pastor Kofi looked at Amara with eyes that shimmered with tears. "Your father walked home barefoot that day, worked barefoot for months until he could save enough for another pair. But the point he helped? That boy got into the school. got the scholarship, eventually got into university on another scholarship. And that boy, the pastor paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle. That boy grew up to become one of the most successful businessmen in this country. I don't know where he is now. He left our town many years ago, but I've always believed that God keeps accounts better than any banker. Kindness like your father's doesn't disappear into nothing. It plants seeds. Amara sat in stunned silence, absorbing the story, feeling it reshape her understanding of the man she barely remembered, but had always loved. Her father had given away his shoes, his only good shoes, to a stranger. She wondered if he had ever regretted it, if he had ever doubted the wisdom of such generosity when he was walking barefoot on hot roads and sharp stones. But knowing her father, even from the faded memories of childhood, she suspected he hadn't. That was who he was, someone who believed that kindness mattered more than comfort, that helping others was never a sacrifice, but a privilege. Pastor Kofi gave her a place to sleep that night on a pew cushion in the church office, and she lay awake for hours, thinking about shoes and fathers and the strange mathematics of grace. The next morning, she returned to Makola Market, not because she had any plan or hope, but because work was all she knew. She was arranging her few remaining oranges on a borrowed crate when Kwame came running, out of breath and wide-eyed. "Amara," he gasped. "There are people looking for you. Men in suits, driving a nice car. They're asking everyone about the orange girl." Her first instinct was fear. Had Auntie Easy sent someone to drag her home? But Kwame shook his head. No, it's not like that. They seem official, important. Come on." He led her through the market maze to the main road, where a sleek black SUV was indeed parked. The same vehicle from the rainstorm. A man in a crisp suit was speaking with vendors, showing them something on his phone, asking questions. When he saw Amara approaching, his face broke into a relieved smile. "Miss Amara?" he asked, though her appearance, small, thin, in a worn dress, made the miss sound almost comical. She nodded, unable to speak. "Chief Osei Boama requests your presence at his estate. Please come with me. I assure you you're not in any trouble. Quite the opposite." Amara looked at Kwame, who looked back at her with equal confusion and excitement, and then at the man in the suit, who waited with patient politeness. She had nothing to lose, she realized. She had already lost everything that mattered. So she nodded again and followed him to the SUV, climbing into leather seats, softer than any bed she had ever slept in, watching through tinted windows as the poor neighborhoods gradually gave way to tree-lined streets and gated compounds that looked like palaces. She was going to meet a billionaire. She had no idea why. Chief Osei Boama's estate was beyond anything Amara's imagination could have prepared her for. Fountains danced in manicured gardens. Security guards in crisp uniforms manned gates that opened soundlessly. The main house rose, like something from a dream, 3 stories of glass and stone and architectural ambition. She was led through marble halls, past artwork and furniture that probably cost more than her entire neighborhood, until finally she was brought to a spacious office where a man sat behind a massive desk made of dark wood. Chief Osei looked up as she entered, and his face, the same kind face from the rainstorm, softened with recognition. And something else, something that looked almost like pain. "Amara," he said, standing and coming around the desk. He gestured to a comfortable chair. "Please, sit. Would you like something to drink? Water? Juice?" She shook her head, perched on the edge of the chair like a bird ready to flee, completely out of her depth. He sat across from her, not behind the imposing desk, but in another chair, making himself level with her. "I'm sure you're confused," he began, "wondering why I brought you here. The truth is, I've been looking for you, or rather, for your family, for a very long time." He leaned forward, his hands clasped together, his eyes holding hers, with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. 30 years ago, I was a boy with nothing. My father had died, my mother was sick, and I was trying to go to school while working any job I could find. I had heard about a scholarship opportunity in a town several miles from my village, but I didn't own shoes, and the headmaster wouldn't even see students who didn't meet the dress code. I was ready to give up, to accept that education wasn't meant for people like me. His voice caught slightly, decades-old emotion surfacing. But then I went to a church, just hoping someone might have old shoes they could spare, and a young man, a mechanic's apprentice, barely older than a boy himself, took off his own shoes and gave them to me. His only good pair, a complete stranger, giving away something precious without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. Amara's breath caught in her throat. She understood now. She understood everything. That young man was named Samuel. Chief Osi continued, "Your father, Amara. Your father gave me his shoes, and those shoes let me interview for that scholarship, and that scholarship let me go to secondary school, and secondary school led to university, and university led to everything. Every hotel I've built, every business I've started, every success I've achieved. It all traces back to a single act of kindness from a man who had so little but gave it anyway." Chief Osoi stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a large envelope. "I spent years trying to find Samuel, to thank him, to repay him. But by the time I had the resources to search properly, I learned he had passed away. He and your mother both, in an accident. I was devastated. I had failed to repay the debt." He handed the envelope to Amara with shaking hands. "But then, 3 nights ago, I was driving through the market during that rainstorm. I saw a young girl trying to save her oranges from washing away, and something made me stop. When you told me your name was Amara, something clicked. I asked my assistant to investigate, and we discovered you were Samuel's daughter, the daughter of the man who changed my life." Amara opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter of admission to one of Accra's best private schools, fully paid for through graduation, a bank book with a monthly stipend account in her name, and a small box that, when opened, revealed the black leather school shoes from Golden Lights Boutique, the exact ones she had stared at through the glass. "Your father planted a seed of kindness in soil he never saw bloom," Chief Osei said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I watched it grow into everything I am. And now, it's my turn to plant seeds for you. You will never worry about shoes again, Amara, or school fees, or books, or anything that stands between you and your education. I've also arranged for a good foster family, vetted, kind people who've been looking to help a child. And your aunt." His expression hardened. "She's been reported to social services for theft and child abuse. She won't trouble you again." Amara looked at the shoes in her lap, tears streaming down her face, and thought about her father walking home barefoot 30 years ago, not knowing that his sacrifice would come back, transformed, multiplied, arriving exactly when his daughter needed it most. She thought about Pastor Kofi's words, that God keeps better accounts than any banker. That kindness never disappears, but transforms into destiny. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words felt inadequate for the miracle unfolding around her. "Thank you." Chief Osei smiled, his own eyes wet. "Don't thank me. Thank your father." He taught me that the truest wealth isn't what we keep, but what we give away. Now, he said, standing and extending his hand to help her up, let me show you your new school. Classes start Monday, and you have shoes to break in. 6 months later, Amara would stand in those shoes in front of her father's grave, placing fresh flowers on the weathered stone and whispering that he was still taking care of her, still shaping her life with hands that had been gone for years but had left fingerprints on the future. She would tell him about her grades, excellent, just like Mr. Mensah had predicted, and about Kwame, who was also in school now thanks to Chief Osei's expanding scholarship program. She would tell him that his kindness had not died with him, but had grown into a tree that sheltered his daughter when she needed shade most. And somewhere in the space between earth and sky, between past and present, between the shoes her father gave away and the shoes that brought her home, grace completed its circle. Because in the end, that's what kindness does. It plants itself in the soil of human need and grows into forests that shelter generations, proving that the smallest seeds of compassion can become the mightiest trees of destiny, and that what we give in love always returns, not as debt, but as grace upon grace upon grace.